Good morning, everyone. I'm Fran, and I'm an alcoholic, and welcome. I'm here to give a spiritual talk, and there it is. Yesterday's balloting. 19 ballots. If that isn't spiritual, nothing is. From 8:20 about to midnight. I'll save this as a souvenir. I'll eventually give it to the archives. As soon as I get over the conjunctivitis. I wanted to pay special tribute to those wonderfully dedicated people in the control room, the computer room, which was on the way to Mars and back. And stand up, would you? We want to give you a hand for. There. Oh, great! There they are. Great. These men and women, they didn't take a break all day. They just sat there staring at that television screen. They got a certain kind of strange glazed look by about 10 last night. But they persevered, and I think we owe a lot to them. I want to introduce my wife, Jan, who so often stands at the mic with me when we talk. Our stories are intermeshed. Jan, good to see you here. And of course, I think you've all met Julian, our new Pacific Region trustee. It's wonderful to have him here. And I noticed yesterday he was doing everything from running to coffee to working on ballots to talking to everyone and so on. It's wonderful to have him as our Pacific Region trustee, isn't it? And one last tribute I'd like to make. If you're in District 44, would you stand up? Was it 44? All right, good. Right. Let me tell you why I single them out. They put a note to the counters of ballots on every single tally sheet they turned in. We got to look forward to those with little notes like, keep it up, you're doing great. Or aren't you getting tired of all this and so on. And there's some wit there who figured out a message, or you did it collectively all through the day. So thanks a lot for doing that. That was nice. Yeah. You didn't think we noticed, eh? Well, we did. That shows you we were really paying attention, My apologies that my story is the same to so many in the Spokane area who have heard it, I'm sure, till they're sick to death of it. But as I said to Jan when we were driving down here this morning, what am I going to do? I'm just stuck in life with one life, one story. I mean, I'd like to make up a better one. But what can I do? But I know you understand, and you love me and I love you because we're in this great fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, and my story is simply my story, and it's simply my story. And As I left the state to begin with, I did my damnedest to belong to a dysfunctional family, but it was functional. I'm sorry. It was a functional family. It was a very fine family, loving mother and loving father. I think on reflection, my father was probably an alcoholic. I know it's difficult to say that about someone else, but all the years I grew up, I associated with him coughing like that in the kitchen, which meant he was trying to overcome the sound of a beer can opener in a bud can. And we knew all of his life really that cough meant he was opening another. But I thought all people did this really. He was a very warm and loving man, and it was an intensely religious family. My brother is a Redemptorist priest, and I think those are all factors because I felt an alien, l'étranger. I didn't fit in. My problem was more misperception of reality. I didn't know it at the time. I thought I was seeing reality properly, and everyone else was kind of off. But I think I was a crackerholic as a little kid. That is, instead of really joining the universe, joining the world, being an active little kid in sports, I was more the daydreamer. I would get on my bike and dream and think of discovering new worlds or this or that. I was something of a precocious little kid. I taught myself to read by reading the comics long before kindergarten, because with comics you could figure out what the words meant by looking at pictures, and strange things interested me even as a little kid, like theology. fascinated me. And I didn't know there was a study of this, organized study somewhere, but I was always curious and interested in asking questions, often getting kind of frowns back, asking these strange kind of questions like, well, how do you know there's a God? And so on. I'm about 4 years old. Yeah, but I remember the topic, it all has a bearing on this weird kind of a person I turned into, and that when I discovered alcohol, oh my God, I'll never forget it. We used to be given little glasses of port wine and so on at Thanksgiving, etc. And I remember as a little kid, I remember that feeling of that warm, effusive, magical spirits going down in me. And I remember thinking, even as a little kid, this is good. This is better than crackers. And suddenly that misperception of reality disappeared, and I was in the center of the universe, and God was, and I could hear the angels singing somehow. And I remember thinking this as a young, not that I would sneak any booze or something. It would be unthinkable in our family. But looking back on it, from the very start, something strange and wonderful and mystical, I thought, happened to me when I ingested alcohol. It made everything all right. It made me all right. It made the universe all right. And I'm here to tell you that I still love alcohol. I really loved it. It was the greatest anything that happened to me in my life. And I drank every single day till I nearly killed myself. And if I hadn't nearly killed myself drinking, I'd still be drinking today. If alcohol had kept working for me, I'd be drinking right now because I loved alcohol. It was the ultimate medicine. It was sweet going down. I never took a drink I didn't like. I still puzzle in the program when someone says, I never liked the taste of alcohol. I liked the taste of alcohol in any of its many and diverse forms. The stronger the better. If you only had weak, that was fine. I just say to myself, well, I'll just drink twice as much. And so on. Alcohol was my life, my friend, my lover, my comrade. Alcohol did for me what the world could not do. It made the world habitable. It made the world a place where I could flourish somehow, or so I thought. It never occurred to me in those early years that there was an insidious devil here, and that the table would turn, and that alcohol could and did become my enemy. No, I went through junior high school and high school and college. I drank a bit more as the years went by, but I attended class and did well and didn't have any particular difficulty. I met dear Jan. We were both English majors at Missouri, and by this time the drinking was pretty intense. But we had a new reason for drinking. It was chic. It was intellectual. Faulkner did it. Hemingway did it. Ezra Pound did it. T.S. Eliot did it. If you wanted the Nobel Prize, the first thing you had to do was learn how to drink. And we truly believed that. Our friends had two characteristics. First of all, they drank. And second, they were involved in literature somehow. That was the way we looked at friends. Jan and I met drinking, dated drinking. We got married, drunk. I was drunk. She was holding on there. I remember our first night in the Colonial Motel in Kansas City, Kansas, getting violently ill and walking around in my shorts trying to find a machine so I could get some ice cold pop because I was so hungover from the champagne. That's the memory of my wedding night. I had at that time a fellowship to go out to the University of Southern California for my PhD, and so the next morning Jan and I packed all of our earthly goods and set off bravely for the West with an ice-cold can of beer between our thighs. I drove in a car so many years with ice-cold beer between my thighs, the shorts on, that I have permanent scars. I never spilled a drop because that was important, and you understand. So we got out to California and entered school. Got a nice place in Santa Monica, and the old kind of terror returned. I tried to submerge this terror with alcohol, and it worked fairly well. But the terror had to do with this, that there were about 400 or so graduate students in English, and one or so PhD was granted each May. And that statistic began to get to me. What are those other, 400 and some doing? I mean, how come there's one or so? It began to dawn on me that I had to really settle down to some intensive, heavy-duty intellectual work here if I expected to finish. And I tried to do so, but I was fearful. I wondered if I could really do it. Wondered if I could achieve in this level. Thank God for alcohol, and every evening. Then began to get to the point where we drank a bit in the morning in order to and I would drive in to teach. I remember getting cramps often and needing to leave the classroom, and terrible, go back in and try to teach, and feeling this soul sickness begin to envelop me. I knew there was difficulty. I knew there was some difficulty not only in my body but in my soul. I didn't know what to do about it. In any case, we finished the PhD coursework in L.A. and got a full-time job as a professor at University of Arizona. I was what's called an ABD, all but dissertation. The idea, I finished all the coursework and passed the test, and now you get a full-time job and you write your dissertation. So Jan and I went bravely off to Tucson, found a little house way out in the desert. These houses we always found were always somehow way out by themselves, and we would pull the drapes. We had beautiful windows facing the Santa Catalina Mountains the 4.5 years we were there, and we never opened the drapes once. They were always closed. What, some of your booze? Or something. So we settled in, and I got my pencils out and desk and ready to write my dissertation. It was all been approved, Time and the Novels of William Faulkner. And I was still, there was a certain craziness and eccentricity. It was so wonderful to find such a group of wonderful eccentric people in AA. I fit right in. For instance, I said, I want to go down and meet Faulkner. And so I got in this old car we had and just drove down to Oxford, Mississippi to talk with Faulkner and get to know him better because I'm writing this book on him and so on. Well, typical, I didn't call first, and he's in Egypt making Land of the Pharaohs. Typical. And but I did meet his mom and did kind of wander around the country. So it was worthwhile. I came back and said, well, how did it work out? Well, he's in Egypt. He said, so where have you been? I went down to Oxford to see William Faulkner. People thought I was crazy. You know better. You know I was simply a practicing alcoholic. I hadn't found AA yet. Of course, I drank all the way down, drank all the way back. Well, Jan and I, we were always going to start a new life. And so we would have a final party on Sunday night. And that was really a party. I mean, we loved drinking together. Whoever could drive would drive to the liquor store for more booze. And we drank scotch usually, or Boilermakers. Scotch was our preferred drink. And we would have this incredible party, total drunk, on Sunday. Because on Monday morning, I was really going to shape up and start in on the dissertation. So Monday, we were so terribly hungover, we would declare it a taper-down day. Right? All right, that brings us to Tuesday. Tuesday, we would have a little serious talk, and we would say, it's already Tuesday. We've already screwed up this week. Let's just drink moderately this week, and we'll really start again on Monday. Now, one of my great achievements in life is that we actually used this rationalization for almost 5 years. I did not write a word of that dissertation at the university. We actually had this idiotic talk. We're supposed to be intelligent people. Actually did what I'm describing to you until finally the chair of the English department called me in and he said, Fran, we love you, love your work and all that, but in effect you're fired. Now, he said he wasn't going to renew my contract because I hadn't completed the dissertation. You and I know why he really fired me, because I'm a practicing alcoholic and my life was a shambles, self-will run riot, everything out of control, and I was going nowhere. During this period in my life, though, I knew somehow that my soul was affected. This disease of the soul. I would do strange things. I would go out to there was a monastery near Tucson. I would go out and check myself in for kind of a weekend of spiritual soul searching and go to Mass and go to communion and go to confession and lie prostrate on the desert floor and ask dramatically for God to appear and so on. I wanted an epiphany. I wanted to see a burning bush. I wanted the clouds to part and God to speak to me directly. Never happened. I would do other weird things, like I would go visit a hospital, and I'd walk around and look at the doctors and nurses and think, this is what I want. I knew somehow that my soul was sick. I knew that my life was not of value, and that I craved that above all. It was not money or fame, romance, sex I wanted. I wanted the feeling that my life was of value. And I would look at a tree even, or a rock, and I would say, God, you've got a function, tree. You're sitting there, and you get shade, and people look at you and they like you. And I have no function that's valid. I'm a phony. I'm a hypocrite. I'm not utilizing those talents which are within me, those capacities. That is what drove me crazy every night when I put my head down in the pillow. The fact that I was wasting my life. And I desperately tried to hide that fact by drinking. And if I drank a hell of a lot, I could just barely erase it. At least for a few hours maybe. And I could pretend in those few hours that everything was okay and that I was really the bright one and the sensitive one and it was the world who was crazy. But then I'd pass out, of course, and then the morning would come and I would have to face the same nightmare all over again. Well, I nearly died in Tucson and did make that magic call to AA, a mystical experience in my life, and that I still to this day don't know why I called AA. This was in 1966, and AA really wasn't that well known. I knew nothing about it. I knew, though, that it existed. And this blind woman, she's very well known down there, named Helen, answered the phone. Looking back on it, I was struck sober somehow. Isn't that strange? It happens to so many of us. We don't know why we make that initial call. It just occurs somehow. In any case, she said, Fran, you just stay there, and we'll send a man to see you. I don't know if he can come during the day, but he'll certainly be there in the evening. And I said, well, how am I going to get along today? And she said, well, just eat bland foods, just take care of yourself, eat some poached eggs, things of that sort, and just wait. I said, all right. There was something in her voice that moved me, that affected me. I hung up, I walked around the little place, and I thought to myself, I don't know how to poached eggs. I actually called her back at the... Yeah. And I said, because I knew even then there was something magic about the fellowship. I didn't know the fellowship really, but there was something in Helen's voice. And I said to her, and I don't know how to poach eggs, could you tell me? And instead of laughing at me, she took me seriously, thank God. I don't think I'd be here if she hadn't told me how to poach eggs, because she did. She told me to heat water and get it swirling and slip an egg in it, and it will poach. And so I thanked her, and I hung up, and I did that. I ate poached eggs all day. I thought it was some kind of magic. I did. I thought it was some kind of magic something. And it worked. It gave me something to do. I just walked around and read and sipped, ice water and ate poached eggs on toast, and the day went by. Jan came home very angry with me because what is this crazy thing you did? My God! And Paul came, the man who was to be our sponsor. Now let me tell you what he was like, because I was so slippery and elusive. I thought I was more intelligent, more sensitive, more knowledgeable than just about anyone I met. Paul happened to be a Catholic. He happened to be a pilot. That was my big lie. I would always tell people about what a pilot I was. I wasn't a pilot. Why that lie interested me, I don't know. But anyway, I loved, that was one thing I loved when I first came in the program. I discovered there's squadrons of lying pilots in AA. Common male fantasy or something, I don't know. Strangely and coincidentally, I did become a private pilot after I came in the program. So it wasn't really a lie. I was just anticipating myself. Well, in any case, Paul was a Catholic. He was a pilot. He was a teacher, and he was something of an intellectual. He had a firm grasp of basic principles, theological and philosophical. And so, in short, when I think back on it, there was no escape from this man. See, I couldn't weasel out. I couldn't slip between the cracks of this man anywhere. He had me cornered. And somehow I knew it. And he took the two of us to a meeting and brought us home with all the literature. Then there was about this much. That was it. That was all the literature we had in the fellowship. And we couldn't wait for him to go. And he went. And I was fascinated with the meeting because I saw these wonderful people. I don't remember a word they said, but they all smiled and they laughed. And what was really astounding, they seemed to know something about me. Do you ever have that feeling at first meeting? They seemed to know something about you that you didn't know about yourself, and you were curious as to what they knew that you didn't know. And it was good somehow. It was nice. Well, anyway, as soon as Paul left, Jan and I ran to the liquor store, brought home Fifth, poured ourselves a couple of drinks, started reading all the literature, drinking, and telling each other, "Hey, look at this! You got to read this. Wow, look, hey, this is me. Oh, this one. Well, look, read this." And we actually passed out reading all the literature that night. And that happens to have been our last drink. That was January 31st, 1966. And we haven't had to have a drink since. We were struck sober. Yeah? Thank you. The next day, somehow the magic had worked, and we waited patiently for a meeting that night. Paul said he would come and take us. I didn't think you could go by yourself. I thought you had to wait for your sponsor to come. And so he came. All right, hop in the car. And he was a very gruff, wonderful man. He's dead now of a heart attack. And we would go off to a meeting, and he'd tell us what to think. Now, knowing me, from the little I've told you, this is my pattern. Right? Immediately, I start going to 5:30 or 6 o'clock Mass every morning, going to communion, going to confession, and so on, just like a nut. I was going to totally straighten out my life in every possible way. I was going to stop smoking, was going to go on a diet, turn into a world's greatest Catholic, so on, so on, so on. Paul took this for about 2 weeks. Then it was a famous talk with him, in my mind, and he said, "Fran," he said, "you're letting your religion interfere with your spiritual life." Really puzzled me. I'm letting my religion interfere with my spiritual life, my growth in the program. And he said, "Yeah." He said, "You're a nut." He said, "You have enough to do just to come to meetings. Just do what I say. Just put these other issues aside. Don't stop smoking. Don't worry about a diet." And he said, "Put your religion on a shelf." Now, he was Catholic. Did I mention that? So I couldn't say, "Well, what does he know? He's not a Catholic." He knew. And so I said, "Well, okay, what does that mean?" He says it means just don't think about that for a while. Just concentrate on the steps in the program. And believe me, this will all work out in the fullness of time. And of course it did. That advice, again, I think is another piece of advice that kind of saved my life. Because if I had kept on trying to do everything, I would have simply exploded. So I put it on the shelf for a while and plunged into meetings. I found my salvation, my personal salvation, in Alcoholics Anonymous. That's why I'm standing here before you today, not because of my allegiance or membership in anything else. It's AA which saved my life, and I always love to say that because it's the absolute truth. Well, so now Jan and I, though, we're out of a job. What do we do? I, by this time again, was so out of it physically that I couldn't even type or write any longer, and so I got an old atlas out and I circled West Coast cities, and I said to Jan, I said, "You've got to write the universities in these circled areas and see about a job." So I had circled Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, Santa Barbara, and L.A., and San Diego, and so on. So dear Jan, always a wonderful wife, wrote all the letters, and guess what? No one was interested in me at all. Jobs were scarce to find then. My record wasn't exactly brilliant. I still hadn't finished the dissertation. So one small Jesuit school in Spokane, Washington, sent a letter. I looked at that. I said, where in the hell Spokane? I didn't circle Spokane. And Jan said, "Well, yes, you did." And I said, "No." And so we got this atlas. I was so out of it that I accidentally hit SBO or so trying to circle Seattle. And that's why I'm standing here before you today. Because it was a mistake. I mean, I didn't have any interest in Spokane. I didn't even know where it was. And these wonderful Jesuits here saw my letter, and I don't know, they saw some possibility there, some chance And to make this long story short, they gave me a chance. They hired me, for which I will be eternally grateful. They loved me when I was down. So I have a lot of kidding with the Jesuits about Father Dowling, who was so important in founding the program, and Sister Ignatius, and the fact that the Jesuits kid me and say, well, AA is just the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius, and so on. And so on. There's a lot of wonderful interaction there between the Jesuits and the fellowship, thinking of the history of the fellowship. So Jan and I in Tucson piled all of our belongings into my 1959 Volkswagen. We've been married now about 8 years, and that's all we had to show for it. We easily put it in the back of a Volkswagen. To show you how our love and devotion to the program, we stopped about every 2 hours, about every 100 miles, driving from Tucson to Spokane and we would call. We had the directory with us, and we would call someone in AA. There's these strange phone calls, hello, we're out here on the highway, we're on the way. Where are you going? You'd like to know a meeting tonight? No, we're just in the car, we're on the way to Spokane. Just wanted to talk to someone in the program. Oh, well, fine, yeah, I'm Bill, and I'm here in Carson City, Nevada. Oh, that's good. And we would just have a little mini meeting, and it just kind of kept us going. I was afraid not to. So we came up here and settled in, rented a house, and a big event for me would not be big for anyone else, but I bought a used power mower, and I drove home with that, sticking out of that old Volkswagen. I thought, my God, I'm really learning what the middle class is all about. Buying a power mower was a big symbol to me. Jan wasn't pregnant. I finally went to the doctor and discovered I had drunk myself sterile. That was a nice day. I said, I'm what? And he said, don't worry about it, Fran. You're in fine shape. You're a man. Everything is dandy. There's just very few motile sperm in there. I said, that come back, good food. And all. He said, I doubt it. He said, he's talking about the way we damage ourselves through drinking. I had cirrhosis. I was in bad shape. We adopted 2 babies, a month old each. And here, of course, I always choke up my own story, because many in Spokane have kidded us. We should have called them Abner and Abigail, because they're our AA babies in so many ways. I would never have adopted them except that I had faith in you. I mean, I thought at the time that these would be AA babies, because I didn't know enough yet to bring up children. I wasn't secure enough. I wasn't strong enough, but I felt you were, that you would help me. And that's exactly what happened. Frank, my son, is now 26, and he went to USC, as his dad did, and then Georgetown Law, and he's now an attorney in San Diego. A wonderful young man who loves to get blasted, as he puts it, once in a while, but doesn't seem to have any interest in alcohol particularly. And then my darling daughter, many of you in the room know her, and she's here in Spokane, has a wonderful political job. And I'd like to tell you a little anecdote about Jenny, and this is with her permission, that Jan's brother is in the program, and his daughter, Jan's niece, came up here to the law school at Gonzaga and did beautifully. She's finished now, and she's practicing down in Nevada. And Jenny and Tracy are very close, which is great. They have 2 families. And Jenny would often want to be with Tracy at night. And Tracy would say, well, I'm going to a meeting, Jenny. Why don't you come with me? And then we'll go to a movie afterward or so on. And so Jenny would. And as time went by, Jenny talked to me about this. She said, Dad, there are a lot of things said in those meetings which seem to apply to me somehow. And I said, whatever. And so Jenny entered the program. She had her first birthday last March. Isn't that great? So you can imagine how wonderful and warm and meaningful to us, to Jan and I, have these years been here in Spokane with these 2 children, living, we hope, or trying to live at least, in the center of the program. Paul said something early in our AA career which we both took to heart and feel was very vital and love to pass on. And he said this, that sobriety is in the steps, but joy is in service. Joy is really in the service, trying to help others, particularly in a one-to-one way, if you can, through through sponsorship. And back then when I came in, AA was different in certain little ways, not in any quintessential way, but for instance, 12-step calls here in Spokane, I would always take a bottle of wine with me, worrying about DTs. And we did 12-step work all the time. Every other night or so the phone would ring and we'd do it, bringing people home, because then, back in 1966, 67, 69, this was before the change in American law, where we had to treat drunks as ill people, as they are, of course. But then we had great trouble getting them in hospitals and so on. I remember many times here going to the Sacred Heart with someone, and they would just ignore us. They wouldn't say, "You leave." They would say, "Oh, yes," and take our names and so on. But somehow we never got attention. We'd just sit there. And finally, say, "Oh, let's go home," Pick him up, throw him in the back of the car, bring him home, and so on. It was that kind of situation. It's changed now a great deal in that regard, I think, in the way we approach, the way we do come into the program. But the basic program, of course, is the same. Jan was very active, particularly with women, and all kinds of strange and wonderful 12-step experiences as the years go by. I also like to mention, because people always ask me if I don't, what about the Romanian years in our life, and that we went as Fulbrighters to Romania to live, and took the entire family, and discovered it was, to be sure, a very repressive country. Any kind of organization was forbidden, including AA, even yoga, because Nicolae Ceausescu and his paranoid wife Elena were schizoid, really, and they were terribly fearful of any kind of foreign anything, and they thought that any organization might be used as cover for subversive activity. Incidentally, they were quite right. The revolutionary forces were gathering, and as you remember, they were summarily executed by the people shortly after the revolution began. Incidentally, the revolution began where we lived, in Timișoara, up in the Banat in Transylvania. Well, anyway, Jan and I needed AA, and so we would have our own little meetings. Jenny and Frank would go in the other room, and Jan and I would go into a small back bedroom, and we would usually have a tape of Bill or someone, and we'd start out the meeting by arguing over who was to be chair, and then we would play. We would read the first part of the fifth, and we would play Bill's tape or some tape that was sent to us from America, and then we'd ask if there were any AA announcements, and we did it just right. Try to do it just right. And that worked out fairly well. But we were starved for a good, solid AA meeting, and around Christmas time we managed to get out through Transylvania into Bucharest, and then on to Vienna with the children. And Vienna was so great, whipped cream, chocolata. And, we hadn't had enough food to eat, nor hot water, nor heat in Romania. It was very primitive, and it was such a joy to be in Vienna. And we went. We called AA, and they told us of a meeting in the Vienna woods, and so we again left Jenny and Frank that night and traveled by tram out near the Vienna woods, and then got hopelessly lost. I like to tell this anecdote because we're talking about spiritual values, and this will always stick in my mind as something amazing that happened to me in the fellowship. In any case, we walked to a corner. It was dark. It was near Christmas, a few days before Christmas. It was snowing. There were perhaps 100 or so people standing at the street corner in Vienna. And we didn't know how to get to the Vienna woods, much less to the castle where this meeting was. And I said to Jan, well, let's just ask someone. And Jan, what do we say, And I just happened, for some strange reason, to see a woman standing before me, kind of in the light. She had a baby in her arms, and I went up to her, and I just said, "Pardon me for speaking to you, but you don't happen to know of a castle nearby here, somewhere in the Vienna woods?" And she looked at me and she said, "Are you a friend of Bill's?" Now, we found out later she was the only one. She was also going to that meeting. She was the only one at that corner going to the meeting. So she took us to the meeting we'll never forget, in this old castle in the Vienna woods. And they made the mistake of letting me chair. And no one said a word for 40 minutes. It was a report our hearts out talking about these horrendous conditions we had found in in Romania. It was a meeting we'll never forget. But in any case, we had to go on to London then, and Jan and the children flew back, and I got back on an old rickety steam train, wooden cars, to work my way back through the Hungarian steppes, the land of the gypsies, back into Transylvania, all by myself. I was scared. I hated that. I hated the feeling that I had lost my civil rights and that I was just a nothingness to Ceausescu. But I love the Romanian people, especially I love my Romanian students at the Universitate. They were extraordinary students, the finest students I think I've ever known. At least I've known none finer. And plunged into work and gave a great many lectures around the country. And one night I'm by myself in my apartment, and suddenly there's a knock on the door. These apartments are terribly dark, just 60-watt bulbs, all the government would give you. And I opened the door, and this woman walked in, and she said immediately, again using the Romanian signs, that meaning the room is bugged, do not speak, I'm not an informer, and give her something to write on. And she wrote, I need to talk to you, follow me. She slipped out again. It sounded like cloak and dagger stuff in America, and I assure you in Romania it still was cloak and dagger. And so I followed her to her own apartment, walked in. There is her mama sitting there at a table with crocheted lace tablecloth, and we sit down and introduce ourselves. She brings out some ersatz coffee bought in the black market and sit there, and she said, I absolutely have to talk to you. Now here again is another spiritual, strange experience that I'll never be able to explain. We talked and talked and talked, a half an hour or so, and I was still trying to figure out exactly what I could do for her, and that she had heard me speak on educational theory at the university. And she said, it isn't that. And I said, well, what is it? She said, I don't know. There's something there. And she said, strange things happen to me sometimes. She said, finally, like 2 years ago, I wrecked a car. Oop, little tingle of a bell. I wrecked a car. Something sounds familiar to me. It's like getting a greeting card from a good friend. I said, you wrecked a car? She said, yeah. She says, sometimes I have trouble with Suica, and Suica is a national brandy drink. And there was a long pause, and I said, wait here a second. Ran all the way back. Got in my footlocker in my own apartment where I kept all this hidden AA literature. I couldn't keep it out. Came back with it and started talking to her about AA. She had never heard about AA at all, but the more I talked, the more excited she got. And we both could see that what had happened here, and this is amazing to state, is that she somehow had seen AA through me, not even knowing AA existed. It's unbelievable. It makes me think in a kind of eerie way that AA existed before AA existed. See, it was out there in the formless void. And it took Bill and Bob to say, hey, there's something out there in the formless void. We're going to pull it together and structure it a little bit, and we're going to call it Alcoholics Anonymous. But it was there. And what am I talking about? I'm talking about some spirit of love and compassion that has to do with those who are allergic to a particular substance, who have used a particular substance to get along, to make life palatable, but who've discovered this particular substance is about to kill them. And what can they do about it? And all these centuries, nothing was known, really. What can we do about it? Just stop drinking. Grow up. Believe in God. Do this, do that. I tried all those, didn't you? Bill and Bob came along and said, hey, maybe by trying to help each other, maybe by loving each other, maybe by trying to give this away, maybe by clearing away the wreckage of the past and trying to live in a decent way, maybe we can do something about this. And they could. Somehow, Rodica had seen something of that, hearing me talk about education. I mean, I wasn't even talking, of course, about alcohol. Well, anyway, that started the first Romanian group, which is still going on, Grupa Una. Rodica is fine. She's at the moment traveling and teaching in the United States, and so I hope she'll be with us all in San Diego as she was. Those of you who are at Seattle remember she carried in the Romanian flag. We brought her over from Romania, and that was a day, of course, we'll never forget. When I left Romania, it was with terrible schizoid. How shall I put it? A kind of angst, feeling of Weltschmerz, because I love these people. The group was developing, and my students, they were so wonderful. And I mean, you can imagine how you love these people. They don't have enough to eat. They do not have enough to eat, and they do not have any hot water. and they're cold for months at a time because the communist authorities would turn the heat off to the communist flats. We have just no idea in America of those conditions. But I came home. But the Securitate had ransacked my apartment before I left, and so I said goodbye to everyone, and I was afraid to tell them that because I knew it would upset them, and I loved them, so I didn't tell them. I found out later that they loved me, and they didn't tell me how they had been harassed by the polizia. It's so moving to me. No one said a word to me about their harassment, but they were harassed terribly. When I was at the border, the train was stopped by the authorities, took me off the train. They accused me of trying to take manuscripts out of the country. That wasn't true. I had already secreted them out through a diplomatic pouch in Bucharest. But they were very insulting and rude and had me guarded by a young Romanian soldier with a submachine gun, and finally threw my baggage back in my belly, intentionally hitting me. Said, "Get back on trend," and so on. So I did. I did manage to take out certain messages, which did help other Romanians later on. But I was a wreck. I was a wreck, and it was so wonderful to get back to Jan and the children, and to go. One symbol we had, strangely, was that Rosauer store on 29th Street. I used to tell Romanians about it, that we have grocery stores in America where there are even chandeliers and carpets on the rug, and you can take anything you want off the shelves. And the Romanians would understand that, but I had failed to tell them one thing. It wouldn't occur to an American to tell them this, but it puzzled them for a long time. They thought maybe I was exaggerating, because I failed to tell them that around midnight all these young men and women reload the shelves. We don't even think of that, do we? So they always wondered about the story, because they wondered because in Romania you might find that, but then you take the groceries off the shelves and they're not stocked again for 2 years, or 1 year, or 8 months, or so on. So this was their concept of America. Well, what Romania taught me, I hope forever, was the great joy and freedom we have with Alcoholics Anonymous here in America. In Romania, we were so afraid of the polizia that we would meet in flower stalls or in outdoor grocery areas, and we would have a peripatetic meeting. We would walk down the street and just pretend we were strolling along after dinner, and we'd really have a meeting. We knew my apartment was bugged, my mail was being opened, so we couldn't do that. Then we got into the second member in Romania was the wife of a rather famous Romanian novelist, and they were moving into a new flat, and she had a back bedroom, and so we, after much discussion, thought we could trust that. And so we would meet back there. So we had to use these peripatetic, subtle means to have meetings, because we were afraid of the authorities. Particularly the Romanians were afraid of what the authorities might do. Here we are in America. That thought wouldn't even occur to us, that we might run afoul of any government with our activities. So the years have gone by, joyously. Years of activity in service of one sort or another. The experience of a trustee is what I'm moving through now, and I can't tell you what an extraordinary joy that is to work with the people such as Julian and the other 21 trustees who see themselves, as they should, as custodians of the Alcoholics Anonymous spirit in action. I think, as most of you know, there are two basic corporate boards: a Grapevine, A World Services operating through the General Service Office, and the overall board is a General Service Board. Every trustee is a member of that, and I want to assure you that there's no them and us again. These people are extraordinary. It seems to me they're loving, they're dedicated, they're devoted. They come from everywhere. No one takes a penny for her or his services. It's so moving to be around them. The Class A's are particularly moving because they come in, and at first I wondered, hey, they don't drink. What are they doing here? And they take a terrible kidding. You go out to lunch with them, everyone, and the Class B's insist they have a drink. Order beer. Why? Then when they have it, why aren't you drinking it? Restaurants with bars around GSO really wonder about us because they see us in there and one or two drinking, having a drink. But it's that wonderful fun, and what's moving to me is to see so many Class A's turn into what I call spiritual AAs somehow. A year or two or three of activity, and somehow a certain kind of loving mellowness takes a hold of them. And they begin saying things like, God, I couldn't believe this works at first, but it's amazing. I felt different this whole year, and you can just see them being picked up by the spirit of AA and being borne along on the wings of song, wings of laughter that bear us along too. It's wonderful to see it in action. It's wonderful to realize that tradition, it seems to me, started by Bob and Bill, is continued. So many little things. I'd love to talk forever. For instance, among the trustees, etc., there's never any head table. Isn't that nice? I mean, just people sit. There's never any assigned to anything. People just sit. There's no secret or private conversations. Anyone walks into any conversation at any time. There are minutes and reports about everything. I don't know anyone probably in the program who reads everything that's actually printed and distributed. It's the quantity is just incredible. So that spirit of openness and let's share and let's love is everywhere. One of my favorite meetings in the world is the 11 o'clock meeting, 11 a.m. on Friday afternoon at GSO. And people passing through town from Europe, from Asia, from Africa, the UN, so on. It kills me not to be able to tell you some of the people I've seen there at that 11 o'clock meeting. Just knock your eye out, because it's well known, and again, visitors come up there, and there they are from all four quarters of the world. Rich and poor, famous and not famous, it doesn't matter. They all crowd in this room and sit down. And what do they talk about between 11 and 12? Almost always from around the world, they talk about gratitude. They talk about what their lives were like and how their lives were going down the drain and how they found AA and how they found sponsorship and how they began to carve out the effective life, the life we all want, a life of joy and service. It's so terribly moving. And AA staff are in the room, and it's a wonderful collection of happy drunks who have found this room on the road to happy destiny. So this is what you've given the two of us, to Jan and to me. How can I ever thank you, Without you, I'd be dead. Without you, I wouldn't have Frank and Jenny. Without you, I wouldn't have the joy in service that I've had. Without you, I wouldn't have had the experience of being a professor all of these years. All of these students I've had all of these years don't really know it, but I've been teaching them AA all the time. Thank you very much. Thank you.